The Summoner's Tale. The painters were good company. As their motorcade turned into the palace grounds, Adam was cheerfully engaged with Sam and Sammy, leaving Tom with a unique opportunity to observe his companions. It had likely been a very long time since Prince Adam had been able to let his hair down around other humans. Adam McGuinness embodied human integration into the Imperium. His wedding to Princess Indara had been an affair witnessed throughout the known galaxy, and while not without its quirks, the underlying message had been there. The Imperium accepted humanity on its terms, and humanity would meet the rest of the known space halfway. What Adam thought about it was anyone's guess, but it fell firmly into the area of impolite to ask. Not that there wasn't enough to keep his mind occupied. So this is how the other half lives. Nestled along the coast, the Imperial Palace was a vast estate of gardens and woodlands. With its ties to the Academy, Tom had quickly learned that the site was hallowed ground, the centre of the Shulvanti Imperium since the Empire had been a mere queendom, fighting off its neighbours to dominate a continent, then a world. Though thoroughly modernised over time, visitors touring the catacombs could touch the earliest cornerstones of the original palace. The Imperial Palace was the soul and centre of Shulvanti cultural identity, just short of the Empress herself. It was literally the bedrock of the Empire. The Northern Palace, only a few hours to the north, was a different proposition altogether. Mever had described it as home to one of the Queendom's early contenders. After being absorbed, the Empresses of ages past had used it as a showpiece of the conquest. As the Queendom grew into empire, the Northern Palace had gone through phases as a summer residence and royal retreat. Far from the bustling life of the capital, it had served for royal weddings and celebrations, its antiquated style evoking simpler times. Even in the first breaths of winter, the gardens were impressive, but compared to the great palaces to the east, south, and west of the capital, the Northern Palace was not a favourite. To Shulvanti sensibilities, the weather was vile, and its amenities were comparatively sparse. In Tom's mind, that beggared the imagination. Used as bequests to an empress's children, the lesser palaces were symbolic of the empress's favour. Prince Laurel had received the Eastern Palace virtually upon his birth, though he'd decamped to his wife's estate when he married Duchess de Seren. But when Empress Kamalesh finally bequeathed the Southern Palace to Princess Kalandri, it carried the title of Duchess of Shil, sealing her position as heir to the throne. Far to the windswept north, Princess Kamordri was named the Duchess of Chivray, and was accorded the Northern Palace, a vast estate with tremendous symbolic weight to imperial history, and very little else. None of which made the Northern Palace any less spectacular. With a breathtaking view along the windswept coast, the drive onto the grounds was majestic, the stark power of Shil's rolling oceans on full display against towering rocks that made up the craggy shore. Beneath sheltering walls, manicured gardens rose in the distance like a wash of colour in the rain, while rough granite walls hewn from the local rock lined the drive toward the estate, blending into the Spartan landscape of boulders and crags, carved by the wind, surf, and time. Towering above the surrounding hills, the estate was a testament to power, but nature was on display beyond the hand of any gardener, however cunning. In an imperium that spanned a fair portion of the galaxy, the Northern Palace stood like a monument in defiance of time. Tom examined his suit. Burdin and the staff from Human Food had arrived hours before to start cooking. Burdin would be bustling around, checking everything, well, almost everything, before getting ready. I measure my gains in luck and coincidence, and here I am, far from home in the company of two astronomers who could buy a sizable portion of a galactic empire, and a soldier who's become a prince. And I'm going to a fairy tale palace dressed like I survived a glitter mine explosion. And what was wrong with that? Nothing, really. I just hope I don't fuck this up. Back on Earth, he'd been casting his days off in steps of uncertainty, waiting for time to claim him. Just lingering, watching the sands running down and measuring out the hours to oblivion, an action that couldn't be undone. Against all odds, Miv had appeared, and he'd reached out for love while on the run, mostly from himself. I put my defeats down to chance or experience, but I tried once again for the light. There wouldn't be children, but for Miv and Leia, Desi was the fulfillment of unvoiced hopes and dreams, and a gift he'd taken a lifetime to know. If anything he'd done had played a part in that, then it had all been worthwhile. Nothing measured in the great tide of events. His daughter had been taken, and another one given. Was it all just a daydream? He was a teacher now, and if the person behind all this hadn't sent Arali Tejo at Kalira, that's all he'd have stayed, happily trying his best to demonstrate humanity as worthy of respect. Not a species to be absorbed, nor a world to be strip-mined. It hadn't been a bad goal at the time, but he'd never imagined himself rubbing shoulders with tycoons and princes, playing a part in this game of empire. Still, whatever that part was, it was his to play out. Tejo, and the hand that had put her in the library with that gun, had seen to that. With the first shot fired, the rivers of fortune had swept them all toward this moment. Tom pulled up the time on his omnipad. It was almost 4, and they'd arrived on time, giving the painters and the royal party a reprieve to settle in. The guests would start arriving just before sunset, and after that, everything would fall like dominoes. In little over an hour, they were committed. A roll of the dice for the life of a girl. For the fate of a throne. The sands of uncertainty have all run out. Time to be a man for all seasons. The Summoner's Epilogue. The last cover before reaching the palace estates was a long tunnel that cut through a different escarpment. The motorcade slowed for the climb, winding for the hill before emerging on the other side. It wasn't a dead halt, but Death's Head armor was built for combat drops, and Slip, Sel, and Ferry had faced worse. Solani Tarnis turned to Prince Adam and gave him a thumbs up. Tom saw Adam chuckle, and his smile was far more predatory than a moment before. Solani waited a moment and... Was that a wink? Maybe. He surprised himself by winking back and grinned as Solani blushed before turning away. Tom had watched the light at the end of the tunnel as the motorcade pulled out. Winter was nearly here, and the days were growing short. The sun was already low on the horizon, and darkness would fall soon. Adam arched an amused eyebrow at Solani, but he didn't ask. It was just as well, since he had no idea what he'd say. Now wasn't the time, anyway. It didn't help that Sammy was grinning at him like a loon, though half of that was envy. They were dressed in immaculate matching tuxedos. Next to him, Adam was in uniform, and while it was Shilvanti, the elaborate belted skirt and all, at least it was sensible. Low on the horizon, a shaft of golden sunlight speared through the window, and his own suit suddenly lit up the cabin like a disco ball. Tom wanted to kill Badin, but he got his head in the game, nodding to the trio. 1, he bit out. Adam's smile grew just a fraction as he nodded Tom's way. 1, and now we wait. Green eyes peered up at him with an impish smile, as Sammy went back to humming, Staying Alive. The Aristarch's Tale. Sun chasers stared past the gardens at the bleak and rocky landscape, as she waited with Marraket to present their credentials. Nice digs. A little freezing rain and an ice geyser. This would be like the night side back home. Could you possibly draw more attention? Marraket grumbled. Sort of Aussie. Hey, there's nothing wrong with battle scats. This kid works out and we'll be wearing him to his weddings. Just as well to wear them a little, right? Life was good. All right, the Shilvanti around them were giving them the eye when they deigned to glance away at all. But who cared? They were off the ship, thank the Dark Mother, and things were looking up. The family had deployed last night, doing a long crawl along the rock face in the driving sleet before finding a cave to hide in for the day. Lucky bitches were probably having the time of their lives, but at least she had the best bit. They'd arrived promptly on time, but out on the service road, vans and transports were stacking up as far as the eye could see. It seemed as if every restaurant on Shill had sent a food truck. Damn, we're going to eat like empresses. I did not mean our skirts. The Shilvanti do not understand our traditions. Marraket grumbled again. The woman hated waiting in lines.
Hey, their house, their rules. Sunchaser elbowed her in the ribs. Just lighten up and let me do the talking.
Sunchaser's smile was unrepentant as she offered up the invitation, and she bounced on her heels in giddy anticipation. You are representing Duchess Eliana Varenne? Disbelief didn't entirely suffuse the guard's question, but it was a near thing. Have you got...
That's us. I'm Sunchaser and she's my +1. The Duchess has taken tremendous interest in human foods as a new import, so here we are.
Sunchaser grinned, without showing her fangs. She was looking her best and she knew it. Peasant formal wear was a glorious thing, and her pelt vest was the finest orange over the traditional battle skirt. She'd even tinted her ear tips to match. It was a shame about Marraket, but there was only so much you could do with sable fur.
Rumour is this whole banquet is human food. You can hold a confidence for us, can't you? I'm sure the Duchess will be very grateful.
A Duchess was a big deal, and Sunchaser was rewarded with the guard's hesitation. Even so, why tell one lie when two would work better? Confidence? Sunchaser smiled like the breaking dawn as she patted the ceremonial dinnerware tucked into her sporran.
We're food critics. Very hush-hush. I'm sure Princess Camordry will want a good review, but who knows with this foreign stuff, am I right? Of course I am. You just keep this between us, eh?
Sunchaser patted the girl affably on the arm, palming over a critter chip smooth as you please. She hadn't lost her touch. Neither had the guard, who palmed the chip away without batting an eye. It was always nice dealing with professionals. As they wound through the damned labyrinth of palace corridors, Marraket managed to find a quiet corner, where she slipped a power cell into her comlink and tapped it once. She was rewarded with 2 taps back, while Sunchaser kept watch.
The family is ready.
Sunchaser only shrugged.
Of course they are. What about me, eh? Nice job, Sunchaser. Great work getting us in. Smooth job palming off the guard, Sunchaser. You've still got it.
Marraket blinked disdainfully.
We're lucky she was only hired security. There are still pods of death's heads patrolling here.
She let out an exasperated snort, pausing as another couple strolled past.
Meh, luck has nothing to do with it. They never use one of those stuffy bints for checking invitations.
But food critics?
Hey, Peshrin are known for having discriminating tastes. Besides, your pet will turn grey if you keep worrying all the time. Hey, there's finger food on that table over there. Bound to be a waiter around here. Maybe we can find out about this past boy.
Sunchaser was halfway across the room, and hungry. After all, it was an insult to your host if you didn't starve yourself before a banquet.
I tell you, kid, these folks need proper food critics. Finger food? Ha! They aren't even real fingers.
Out in the field, the girls would be waiting for darkness to fall. Stripped to their skin suits, they'd probably be running one last gear check, but it was only a 200-foot cliff. A kid could scale it. Nah, they'd be in position a little after sunset, and able to spread out. This place was lit up like a solstice festival, showing off for the knobs. Once the girls spread out, they'd see anything there was to see. Easy stuff and,
oh hey, there's the bar.
It might be a proper shindig after all. The Aristarch's epilogue. Arisa Muefowl knew that her mother's legacy would never endow her with prospects, yet she considered herself fortunate. From a young age, she has seen the interior as her lifeline. Gifted with her mother's tenacity and her father's discretion, she has studied hard, checked all the right boxes, and made the right contacts. The day she'd been accepted was one of the happiest in her life. Performing her work with a grim determination, some of her peers had taken to calling her the Silent Shadow. A spiteful epithet from women who gave less than their best. Arisa considered it a badge of honor that she left no stone unturned. Like her acceptance into the interior, her later acceptance into the Family Services Division had been a vindication of her years of effort. Of course, her earlier work had not been wasted. She developed a healthy sense of how the game was played. So, while her posting under Princess Camordry and Special Agent Shariva ought to have been another validation, she'd quickly adjusted to the difficult and occasionally bizarre realities and made the best of her situation. Former professional partners from Her Majesty's brief years in the interior, the pair were inseparable. As Shariva's lieutenant, she had a plum posting. The entirety of FSD was only a few hundred people out of an empire of trillions, yet she had nowhere to go and no way to advance. Camordry lived an isolated public life, but the reality was that she was an effete, foppish woman, given to acting on her whims. Shariva fed those tendencies when she wasn't away on one of her excursions, leaving Arisa to do the actual work. But this morning had been too much. Shariva was increasingly erratic, and with 2 imperial princesses and the cream of Shul society attending, all it would take was one irregularity for things to go badly. She was counting on it. Right now, her supervisor was off smarming about in her dress purples, welcoming guests and socializing, blissfully unwilling to be any help. And there were issues that needed attention. Arisa shouldered her way into the kitchens, her omnipad pressed to her ear. Yes, I understand. What? No, Captain Biona is not in charge, no matter what she says, and... Right. I get there are 100 catering vans out there on the drive, and... What do you mean more are coming? I'm going to talk to the celebrity chef they foisted on us and confirm. I'll be back to you shortly. Moifel out. All around her, the main kitchen was thronging with frantic activity, the crash of pans and cutlery leading a symphony of noise. Rather than wasting time, she waited as a pair of waiters sped past with a fruit tray and closed in on one of the kitchen staff. The man saw her coming and shook his head, raising his voice over the clamour. You're going to need a tray. Moifel blinked in spite of herself. What? I said you're going to need a tray. The cook waved a hand over at the corner of the room. Staff eating before the event need to get in line over there. No, I don't need a tray, The deeps you don't! The portly fellow wiped his hands off on his apron and gestured at a row of brown loaves just going into the oven. This food is hot. You need a tray or you'll burn your fingers off. I do not need a tray! Moifel raised her voice over the hubbub, wishing she could at least be in her duty uniform rather than blending in for once. Do you know who I am? Do you know who I am? The chef jutted his tusks up at her insolently. There are rules. You can't eat in our food preparation area. I'm Arisa Moifel. I'm in charge here. What? The little cook peered up at her uncertainly. You're in charge of palace catering? Hella give me strength. She took a deep breath and tried again. I'm with the interior. Really? The little man wiped his hands off as he peered at her earnestly. Because of the princesses? Yes! Moifel thanked the goddess. At least she was finally getting somewhere. Now, if she could just find out who the head chef was, she could... I'm sorry, ma'am, but you're still going to need a tray. Arisa closed her eyes, took a fortifying breath, and counted to 12. She opened them to see another man, clad in scandalizing rubies, sweeping down on them both. Rislan, who is this woman? Why are you delaying the main course? I shall be ruined. Ruined, I tell you. Forgive me, Mr. Tsari. The chef beat his chest and keened. This is Miss Saral. She says she's in charge of palace catering and she doesn't want to get a tray. It had been a bad day, and it was getting worse. She gathered herself to try again. I'm Arisa Moifel, and I'm with the interior. And I am Berdine Desari, Culinary and Supreme to the Great and Good, summoned by royal appointment. The little man stood back, clasping his hand to his heart as he gazed to the heavens, or at least the ventilation duct. Why have they put you in charge of catering? Can't you see I'm toiling away to create art? She won't get a tray, wailed the cook. I am not here to eat. Wait, what? Moifel stared at Desari, who was swanning his arms over the stove and kissing his fingers. What are you doing? It is a chef's kiss. What sort of base vulgarian are you? Desari waved at the cook frantically as he examined the platter of steaming pasties. Coming in here without a tray and distressing Reslanso. You can see he's a nervous wreck, can't you?
Goddess!
It certainly wasn't Reslin in distress, though on any other day she might have found the two men endearing. Desari's sense of style was certainly breathtaking, but just now he very well might fly apart at the seams. It was oddly charming, but she didn't have time for this.
My name is Arisa Muifal. I'm with the interior, and I have nothing to do with catering.
Then why are you interrupting us? The main course will be late if you don't leave Reslin alone. Miss Saral will hear of this.
Right, fine. Miss Saral sent me, so listen. There are over 100 catering trucks backed up outside the palace, and they're all saying they were called for. Did you send for them?
What? Never! Desari struck a heroic pose beside the juicing machine, as if he was defiantly weathering out a storm. Jackanapes! Pedestrian scoundrels! Inferiors with no sense of style! Tell them to be gone while we get you a tray. Lingering nearby, Cadet Vandra Elidri gave Prindy Amandis a wink as they loaded the fruit platters.
Two?
Vandra whispered. Prindy glanced past her shoulder and nodded. Agent Davari had approved their suggestion and even offered up a contact at the Imperial Palace to confirm the reservations. It had taken the IRTC cadre all week to call every restaurateur on the datanet, but they would clog the roads for miles, tying up security. The Minstrel's Tale. It was no vast stadium, no arena rising above the roaring sea, no twilight backdrop, with chill silvery moons casting a halo about a distant figure of white. He'd nearly sobbed while getting ready. His last show, his last outing. The grief ripped and rent his soul like an enraged Grinshaw, tearing at his heart and leaving him in tatters. His eyes welled with tears. He dared them away, glaring defiance in the mirror. Although the auditorium was small by comparison, it was still his for tonight. Nothing and no one in the universe could take that away from him. He would not allow it. It was only a short set. 3 songs for the royal table and the guests of honor, but he'd spent his week well. The show was for them, but it was his show, and he scoured the music, not just to learn it to perfection, but making his choices cut like a butcher knife. As the lights came up to polite applause, he bowed to the royal table. Washed out from the lights rising on him, he still spotted 2 glimmers of silver hair. The Kerbal sisters. His friends were here. The first song wasn't for them, but for the audience, and he reached out to them from the start. If the 7 Seas of Rye had a biting irony, he was the only one to know it. Well, maybe the humans. Professor Warwick was probably out there somewhere, and there were the 2 at the table, but rather than remain in the backdrop as a cliff singer, Akaroon tossed convention aside and strode to the edge of the stage, taking them in. Every dame, duchess and baroness, every guard and guest. Tonight they were all his, and his fist pumped out, clawing to the heavens as if the ceiling blew away. It doesn't matter if they don't understand a word. They'll afford me what is mine. The women in the crowd were stunned, uncertain of what to do. On any other night, he'd have given them a rest, spoken to them, made a dedication, introduced himself. Tonight, he had neither the time nor the inclination. Tossing off his jacket, he threw himself into the performance with abandon. It doesn't matter if they don't understand a word. They'll afford me what is mine. The women in the crowd were stunned, uncertain of what to do. On any other night, he'd have given them a rest, spoken to them, made a dedication, introduced himself. Tonight he had neither the time nor the inclination. Tossing off his jacket, he threw himself into the performance with abandon. It left him clad in a loose white tank top that made them gasp as he broke into good old-fashioned lover boy. He teased them with the light and bouncing lyrics, toying with them as he glided across the stage. It had taken all week to learn the new moves, but he played them to perfection, demure in one moment and bold in the next. A lover boy, a boy toy, no hard feelings. but that's all you'll ever get of me. The song ended, and they didn't matter anymore. The audience was gone as he turned and strutted boldly toward the royal table. He was lost in the darkness, but he knew where it was, and he swept across the stage. From an audience of hundreds, his audience dropped down to the dozen or so figures in the royal table. He performed for them. As he launched into I Want to Break Free, he performed for himself. Raw, unabashed, revealed to them all, he tore through the melody, focused on every word, offering himself up to them, even if they didn't know it. Cast aside, another man turned into a trophy husband by family and fate. I will not go quietly. He devoured every performance of his idol that he could find, even before the news that tonight was his farewell. Absorbed every nuance he could in the hope of showing everyone something new, of making his art come alive. Freddie Mercury didn't do dedications. He reached out to the whole audience and made them his own. He acknowledged the musicians who worked with him, but individuals seemed rare. He sang out to the whole world and drew it into him. But not tonight. The crowd was riveted, but when one of the princesses rose with the humans at the head table, the crowd exploded. He'd finished his set, but was ahead of time. Thank you. I thank you all. But tonight I want to thank two very special people. He reached out into the darkness. The princesses would be there. The human guests of honor were there. He reached out to Lynn and Mara with all his heart. Let the rest of them wonder. You're the reason I'm here tonight, and I'll never forget you both. This song is for you. And it was. It was for Lynn and Mara, and it was for him. Alone in the darkness, this was his to share, and let the rest of the world be damned. The music rose slowly, and he cradled the microphone to him. Empty spaces, what are we living for? Abandoned places, I guess we know the score. On and on, does anybody know what we are looking for? Lynn and Mara knew what they wanted in life, who they wanted to be, just like he had until last week. He still did, but with his chance torn from him, what was left? Another hero, another mindless crime, behind the curtain, in the pantomime. Hold the line, does anybody want to take it anymore? He pumped his fist out to the darkened ceiling, as if roaring out to the heavens. The show must go on. The show must go on. Yeah. The moment passed, and he bent over, embracing this moment of truth. If only they all understood how true it was. Inside my heart is breaking. My makeup may be flaking, but my smile still stays on. The girls wouldn't understand. Not yet. There was a car waiting to whisk him away from all this the moment the show was over. Then he'd send the email he'd saved. Only then. Whatever happens, I'll leave it all to chance. Another heartache, another failed romance. On and on. Does anybody know what we are living for? A trophy husband. A token in a business deal. Was that all his life amounted to? He'd wanted so much for his life. He'd wanted to be a cliff singer. Wanted wives who'd accept him, like Lynn and Mara. Who knew all the endless could-have-beens? I guess I'm learning. I must be warmer now. I'll soon be turning round the corner now. Outside the dawn is breaking, but inside in the dark I'm aching to be free. He'd wanted the right to choose his life. What was there to take from that when everything was taken from him? Akarun tore through the second refrain and reached out to the table, beckoning to the two women who'd never treated him as a token or a toy. No marionette on a stage, and they treated him as an equal and a friend, and he loved them for it. My soul is painted like the wings of butterflies. Fairy tales of yesterday will grow but never die. I can fly, my friends. He wouldn't give up. Certainty rose within him like the soaring crescendo of sound crashing around him. He was trapped. He didn't know what he'd do, but he refused to roll over and accept the fate others wanted to make for him, and he sang it out to Lynn and Mara like a promise. I'll face it with a grin. I'm never giving in. On with the show. I'll top the bill. I'll overkill. I have to find the will to carry on. Akarun reared back, his arms to the heavens above as he roared the final verse. The show must go on. Purple light fell about him and faded to black. Out in the auditorium, women cheered and yelled for more. Akarun turned and made his way off the stage. His time here was over, at least for tonight. Outside, his family's touring sedan would be waiting to whisk him away to a life he didn't want, a fate his soul rejected. Akarun paused off stage and let the sound wash over him. Unlike even the touring concerts under Mistress Trangia, this was the first time he'd sung to an audience for himself. It was his moment, and he would never let himself forget it. It was his, all alone. Though, it really would be nice to have a band. The minstrel's epilogue. The room was agog as the light faded. When Shamantal fell below the horizon, cliff singers ended their concerts as disembodied voices in the darkness. Akarun's performance has stunned them all. For the span of 3 songs, he has shone like a star. Around the room, elderly ladies clutched their chests, while younger women cheered, fluttered, and fanned themselves without thought to their station. The performance was like nothing they'd ever seen. Even clothed in an alien language, the unbridled power of his voice poured from the depths of his soul, as Akarun commanded the stage like it was his empire. Any question of whether it was good was quickly rendered moot, as the painters cheered for more, yet it was Princess Kalira standing to politely applaud, followed by Princess Indara and her husband would seal the deal. It was one thing to know they'd seen something breathtaking, but any sensible woman waited for the verdict of a princess. Relieved of that burden, the crowd called out for more. Oblivious as the room hummed harder, Caslin Kerbal tilted her head and watched as the curtain fell.
Mara, what do you think he meant? I don't speak English.
Acting as a mirror, Mara plucked the pin from Lynn's hair and deftly ran her fingers through it, brushing back a silver lock and tidying her up.
You recorded it, right? We can translate it later. Not the song?
Caslin bit her lower lip, trying to catch her sister's eye as she dug past the kitchenware.
That part before. I don't know, but it's time for me to swap. I can't be late.
Kamara fished out the box with her wig and paused. The pensive expression she wore matched the seasickness Lynn felt, gnawing at her stomach.
We'll figure it out later, I promise.
The Princess's Tale. Seated at the main table along with the painters, Her Royal Highness, Indara Tassu, Princess of the Shovanti Imperium, clapped appreciatively and managed not to blush. After all, Adam was beside her. Though the performance had been stirring, the room was filled with nobles from across Shill and the nearer worlds. The loss of Culinary had created a vacuum on the social scene, as everyone with a hint of decorum joined the Empress in her period of mourning. All of which had made the Imperial Science Award, and the few other occasions which couldn't be cancelled, into the events of the year. Distinguished scientists, legitimate attendees from across the Imperium, were being jostled about by the great and the good, as well as every social climber and court toady who managed to inveigle her way here.
Goddess give me strength. I hate these things.
Rather than wear her proper dress uniform, tonight called for the royal regalia. It was stiff, high-collared, and uncomfortable. although she had to admit Adam was adorable in his. Outside on the grounds, Slip, Cell, and Ferry would be working their way out to the perimeter. If their suits IFS were pinged, they'd come up as Pod 9, assigned to her personal detachment, but only if they were pinged. The sun was setting, and if the reports in her earbud were right, at least half the death's heads on Palace security had been drawn into sorting the growing chaos outside. Her co-wives had just spent a busy week anonymously confirming every caterer, but while Ferry had mended since her time in the hospital, she didn't handle convalescence well. The week hadn't brought them closer to finding Satora's killer, yet it was still something they could do. As dear as Satora had been, keeping Kalira alive right now was the job.
At least they get to be out in the field enjoying themselves. I have to be stuck here on display.
As much as she loathed the role of the touring royal family, they'd used her cover to slip onto dozens of worlds. Being insufferably visible was part of the act, but out in the crowd were more than a few reporters, including the Rocher girl and the one they called Lark. They'd be keeping their cameras on the painters and the royal table. If things went badly wrong, visibility might be all that kept them alive. The staff on the tide pool were indisputably doing their best to be distracting. While immaculately dressed, well, if their shirts were scandalously tight, no one had complained when they leaned in to serve.
Do not blush. Do not blush.
She had an image to maintain, and Adam would never find out about the weekend she graduated from training. A woman was allowed some secrets. Thank the goddess she and Adam had a waitress, instead. She caught Adam looking, but it was only once. That she'd seen. She reached over and patted her husband lovingly on the hand, before giving a genteel wave to the maître d', a woman of the palace staff, rather than the crew from Human Food. She was appropriately attentive and hurried over. A shame. Vadim was supposed to be a nice boy, but she'd meet him eventually, in a much better setting than this.
That was most amusing. Steward, I know young Akaroon has to go, but this is such a mob.
It wasn't, but the crowd of clamouring, incensed and hyperventilating women spread around the room would do.
Tell Palace security I want 2 pods of the palace's best deaf heads to see him safely home. The young man is a cliff singer, after all. I insist.
The head waiter bowed deeply.
I'll see to it at once, Your Royal Highness. Oh, and see to it that he's fed, won't you? The young man was so energetic, I'm certain he'll be famished. Of course, Your Highness.
The woman bowed. Was she blushing too? It would probably be harder to find a woman in the room that wasn't.
He shall eat better than the palace staff. Oh, there's no need to go that far.
Indara airily waved the woman away.
Better than us will be sufficient. Goddess, I want to get back in my armor, but that's 2 more pods out of the way.
It wasn't as satisfying as a firefight, but every bit helped.
4.
Indara glanced over at the painters, bestowing a smile. They'd been served all evening by a charming set of twins. She watched from the corner of her eye as one slipped behind the curtains.
And 5.
The Princess's Epilogue. Braiding her hair back around her head and tugging on a skull cap had taken only moments, but Kamara paused under Dasala's scrutiny.
What is it?
I just never saw myself going silver. Anyway, hurry up. We don't have time. Kamara rolled her eyes and tugged on the dark wig, slipping the clasps securely into place and brushing it back. Dasala's dark hair was short, just brushing over her shoulders, and she claimed it was better for diving. It still felt odd. How do I look? Dasala checked for stray hairs, but nodded. Good. They only saw me a few times at table 9, and dinner's just starting. The important one's named Orokiv, and she's some kind of duchess from Sevastopol. Old as the hills, and an accent you can cut with a knife. If she even notices, just say we got swapped out in the kitchen, or pretend you don't understand. Now, give me a hand. Mara still wasn't sure about Dasala, but now wasn't the time. Work now, throttle her later. Letzi had been hidden away in the kitchen, rather than serving the guests. The place was a madhouse of activity as Mr. Dasari was wailing at the palace steward over a to-go meal, while Professor Warwick stood by, ready to catch him if he fainted. She closed the pantry door and joined Dasala.
Are you three going to be able to get out of here?
With all that going on, who'll notice? Dasala stripped off her waitress jacket and pulled on a dress coat, just as Letzi tucked the container open, spilling a snarling Zinshiki out onto the floor.
Gaha! Perfect, Bara! We don't have time,
Kamara chorused, with Dasala. It was fine doing that with Kaslin. With anyone else, it just felt weird. The Persian rose to her feet, tucking her skin suit into place. It really did look like a bikini.
That lacked dignity, and I nearly suffocated.
Letzi was already up and tugging on another dress jacket. She and Dasala had come in as waitresses. They'd leave the kitchen as guests. Zinshiki would just have to make do.
You'll get a big container on the way out. You know what they said. Yes. Food and supplies are not checked coming in, and the garbage goes unchecked on the way out, she said tartly, tugging a shawl out and wrapping it around her. It wasn't much of a disguise, but it would do once the lights went out. A waste bin all to myself. I'm thrilled.
Right, I have to get back and be Dasala. Kamara turned a whiter shade of pale.
Kesson has to be both of us. I can't imagine how she'll manage.
Seriously? Dasala rolled her eyes, her voice dry as a Helcom desert. That? You can't imagine that?
Lick me.
Kamara paused at the door to look back at the trio. Dasala, Letzi, and Zinshiki were an unlikely group. They had all the right skills to succeed. Probably. Playing their parts as 6, 7, and 8, they could also just as easily disappear and never be seen again. If Kalira's death's heads were already fighting with the local pods, then Part 9 was already in play. No one knew the whole plan, but everyone knew up to a point. Right now, she had just enough time to get back to the ballroom and take Dasala's place. A few minutes after that, and all the deeps would start breaking loose.
Just be safe, okay?
Kamara whispered, and shut the door behind her.